I was deeply, deeply desolate at the beginning of COVID because I couldn't see a way back to normality. The word innovation is judgmental. I think it is. I wouldn't describe the changes to surgical training in the early 2000s as innovative. You have something goes spectacularly wrong and people go, oh my goodness, how did that happen? No one's ever going to do a study with that drug again. So, does it matter? Yeah, it does. It does matter. I think there's a journal called the Journal of Negative Studies.
That could be very useful.
Yeah, but no one reads it.
Welcome to the Visionary Podcast, where we discuss science, medicine, physical health, and mental well-being. COVID vaccines were tested in diverse populations very quickly. This is the power of a system in crisis. What did that process do right that can be replicated in other conditions?
Gosh, lots has been spoken about the COVID vaccination program, and I'm not expert by any means in the COVID vaccination program. So I speak as a scientifically educated amateur rather than an insider.
That's good enough.
But what I would say we did very well. The urgency of the situation concentrated people's minds on what bits of process and bureaucracy were really necessary and what bits weren't. So I think we had brilliant dialogue between the regulators and the companies. We had brilliant dialogue between researchers, academics, and the pharmaceutical industry. So there was great communication, great teamwork, a risk proportionate regulatory approach, iterative, a good real world evidence collection, good pharmacovigilance. We recognised that we wanted to keep an eye on these vaccines and make sure that they were working and weren't causing side effects. We were good at that. The rollout was incredibly effective. I think that was a sort of great national success from a sort of logistical organisational point of view. People pulled together and volunteered. There was a great sort of outpouring of goodwill, I think. We reduced our constraints over data use, so it can be quite difficult to get access to data and use data. We really removed quite a lot of the barriers to data use within the system in order to, there was an urgency. And many of us had hoped that would result in a more flexible, more risk proportionate system on a permanent basis. I think some of our sort of previous bureaucratic approaches have crept back in again, and safety and data protection, all these other things. I understand it, but it did show. I mean, it was actually incredible. We don't think about it, but if you think back, I was deeply, deeply desolate at the beginning of COVID because I couldn't see a way back to normality, and I would say that affected some quite big decisions I made in my life because I saw this through the lens of previous pandemics and previous crises. If you look back at the great flu outbreaks of 1918, 50s and 60s, huge numbers of people died. And it took a long time. I mean, the 1918 flu pandemic, they're uncertain, but possibly over 100 million people died of flu. And we're still dying of flu 3 years later. I mean, it was an absolute catastrophe. And COVID was over really quite quickly.
Relatively,
in the scheme of things.
When you look at history.
The immediate crisis, of course, we still live with COVID today, but the immediate crisis and the deaths from COVID were on a historical scale. Every death. I mean, it was awful and it was traumatic, and the world will never quite be the same again. People of my generation particularly will never quite be the same again. Our children who were locked down had major psychological issues. People lost friends and family. But oh my goodness, it could have been so much worse.
Yes, now we can see that. Yeah, absolutely. David, you moved from the charity sector to pharma.
Because of COVID.
Because of COVID, yeah. What surprised you? What surprised you or shocked you the most about the difference, and why did you venture into that move?
So I started my career in medicine, in surgery. I then moved to Pfizer, and I spent 11 years at Pfizer. 11 incredibly happy years. Loved my time at Pfizer. Did amazing things. I will always be very, very fond of those 11 years of Pfizer. I then moved to the charity sector and to Prostate Cancer UK. I spent 18 months there and left again. COVID hit and the charities had real challenges with cash flow. We had people on furlough. We needed to cut jobs, and I'll be honest, we had a plan in my organisation. We'd been asked to think about what we would do in the event of a financial crisis, and I had said in the September before, long before COVID had even remotely come across anyone's radar, I had written my plan for what my department would do in the face of a financial crisis, and it was get rid of me. I was there as a innovative leader. I was there as a strategist. I was trying to think big about how we did innovation and how we did research differently. And in the face of having no money, it didn't make a lot of sense to be paying my salary to not do that. And I had two people in my team who were very good. I'd been working with one of them to take over from me. And in the face of an immediate crisis, I thought keeping them and their operational leadership and getting rid of me was the thing to do. So COVID hit, and I slightly regretted the plan written in the in the face of not believing that it would happen, and there we are 4 months later having to implement this plan. So I have a real sadness. I look back, real sadness that my time at Prostate Cancer UK came to an end in the way it did. Actually, I'm really it was not how I would have wanted it to finish. I'm glad of the decisions I took. I'm pleased for the guys who stayed behind, but nonetheless, what did I find different? I was, I guess, a little surprised to see so little difference.
Really?
Yeah. Pfizer was a well-run, well-structured, multi-department organization, clear vision what it wanted to achieve, clearly delineated responsibilities on who was trying to achieve which bits of that, with a very good governance structure, an excellent governance structure. And I went to Prostate Cancer UK. Pfizer was 100,000 people globally. Prostate Cancer UK was 200 people. So clearly the scale was different, but it was a well-organized, well-run, multi-department organization, clear on what it was trying to achieve, with all the different departments contributing effectively to that and doing their role in the way that they should be, and with an excellent governance structure.
Yeah.
And it was just, frankly, it was they were two professional organizations trying to make things better for patients. Now, were they different? Of course they were different. There were differences. I mean, Prostate Cancer UK wasn't trying to make a profit. Pfizer was. Prostate Cancer UK didn't have shareholders. Pfizer did. But Prostate Cancer UK had stakeholders. They had donors. They had people that they needed to please. They were doing things. They were both trying to manage their stakeholders and their financial contributors in different ways. So, I was remarkably surprised by the consistency. And in any one individual, if you took anyone that I'd worked with at Pfizer, anyone that I worked with at Prostate Cancer UK, and you briefed them not to tell you which organisation, but just to have a top-level conversation about what they did for a living, I would challenge you to work out who was from which organisation. There was a real commitment to, I think, generally speaking, a real commitment to trying to make a difference to patients.
Yeah, it's funny because seemingly they look like they have two completely different mission. Yeah.
Very consistent mission statements, very consistent approach to mission as well.
Okay. And when you moved from being a surgeon to be part of a pharmaceutical company, have you ever received criticism from colleagues who thought that you were going corporate?
No, I haven't. I think a lot of people don't understand what I do. So I joined the medical department at Pfizer, and I know I met a number of people. I lived in Glasgow, and so I saw colleagues from university. A number of people I didn't know that or hadn't spoken to in a while, had been friends with previously, bumped into in the street, whatever. The line that I used to get a lot at the beginning was, "I hear you've gone to be a sales representative."
Sorry to laugh, but this is funny.
No.
Funny.
I mean,
this is part of the misconceptions about pharmaceutical doctors, right?
I think it is completely rooted in the misconception that all bits of the system have about all the other bits of the system. You know, at the pharmaceutical industry, we see patient groups as a homogenous group. And patient groups are not homogenous entities. Charities are not homogenous entities. They've got corporate affairs teams, they've got communications teams, they've got research strategists, they've got HR departments, they've got fundraisers. They're a company. I spoke at conferences all around the world. We fundamentally changed how we care for women. And not just in that setting, but actually it really fundamentally shifted the way we think about follow-up care in oncology, cancer generally. Not single-handedly, but we were a really big part of it. BMJ and the breast and British Journal of Surgery, really, really high impact factor journals. I love writing. One of my sort of passions is writing, and it was just such a buzz finding something out, understanding what it was going to do to the healthcare system if you could implement this new knowledge and change the way we did things, writing it down, sending it into a journal, seeing it in public. I mean, you don't see it in paper anymore very often. You know, see it online, but they would send me a physical journal with my paper in it, David Montgomery, and it was incredibly addictive.
Yeah, and the pride.
And I became that had I stayed in medicine, I would have been an academic surgeon. I would have done research all my career because I fell in love with it. And so we fundamentally shifted the way we think about training. So it was a real shame. I got stuck, thought it would be, I could see how hard it was going to be to get into a system that had changed and where there wasn't a clear route in, was amenable to the possibility of doing something different. And my wife and I did talk about going to Australia for a while. My wife's an Australian citizen and trained in Sydney. So we did talk for a long time. We went to Australia 2 or 3 times. Of course, we went to see family and things, but we got into long conversations with surgical colleagues in Australia about potentially coming back out there. I think that would have been, in the absence of my wife bumping into a colleague from Pfizer at a congress and discovering that this was a route into industry and there being a job available, no less, that I could do from Glasgow. Again, some real serendipity there. In the absence of that, I think we would probably have gone to Australia at that stage.
Hi, I'm Hala, your host today. If you're enjoying what you see, please hit that lovely subscribe button. It will mean a lot to us. Or maybe a small podcast now, but with your support, we can build this channel together, one step at a time. Thank you so much for being part of it. Well, during your long time at Pfizer, were there moments where pharma priorities and patients' need felt misaligned? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, for me, never, actually. We were very lucky, I think, at Pfizer. I joined it just as Pfizer was becoming an oncology company. And for the most part, we had some really innovative, really exciting medicines through that period, which I was really really pleased to be able to work on. And I never felt any tension at Pfizer, actually. I never really...
You know why I'm asking this? Because you talk about responsible innovation, which implies that you're saying that not all innovations
are responsible.
Are good innovations.
So,
give us some examples of that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's not so much about, I think, responsible innovation. I think it's just balancing risk and benefit within an innovative framework and finding things that are valuable and truly fulfill a need. I think it's about patient centricity, right? So I think if you engage in the community and you engage with patients and you understand what the challenges are and what people want from treatments, I think you'll find it is easier. I think you'll find the innovation flows from that. If you're trying to fix a defined need, very difficult for us as a company to define the need of patients. And I have seen companies with medicines that struggle. They're clinically very effective medicines, but they have challenging side effects.
Yes.
And there are diseases where patients' day-to-day quality of life isn't that badly impacted by their disease for quite long periods of time, slow, indolent, autoimmune conditions, those sorts of things, but taking a medicine on a daily basis. So if you've got a disease that's gradually getting worse over a long period of time, and you're getting a little more fatigued with each passing month, with each passing year, whatever, maybe there are other side effects or symptoms of that disease coming along, but they're coming along gradually.
Yes.
You learn to cope and you learn to adapt.
That's totally me, because I have autoimmune diseases.
If someone gives you a tablet for that disease,
I might struggle more with that.
Causes you diarrhea,
Yeah.
an acute diarrhea, 5 or 6 times a day, you think, okay,
I don't want the drug now. I'll manage it somehow.
You don't want the drug. And I think quite a lot of people, that's a balance to strike, because you get the side effects right away, and quite often these side effects will settle over time. So I think there is some communication to be had with patients over the necessary, patience and tolerance of these. Sometimes get quite bad side effects the first 2 or 3 days, and then they settle, and the medicine in the long term slows the disease and is worth taking. So there's a dialogue to be had. Inhaled insulin is a really good example. They very early inhaled insulin. The theory was that inhaled insulin would be a more practical way of taking it than having a needle and injecting insulin, and in particular people who were needle phobic. Now, the problem is with diabetes, you get over your needle phobia quite quickly. Because if you get type 1 diabetes and you don't treat it, then you get very ill and potentially die quite quickly with something with an acute type 1 diabetes of that type. And the devices are very subtle. So insulin pens are small, they're pen-sized, they fit in a pocket, they're very discreet. You can administer your insulin sitting at a dining table with very little fuss. It's not complicated. And the very first inhaled insulin devices, the administration device was huge. It was the size of a small fire extinguisher.
Wow.
And so the uptake, so Pfizer launched one of these in 2006 and withdrew it from the market in 2007 because the sales had been so poor. And that's a really interesting case of, and I think people talk about this, is a really interesting case of, I see the problem. I mean, people have subsequently released inhaled insulin with much more discreet, much more user-friendly devices, and those have been successful. Yeah. But identifying a challenge, but providing the wrong solution. And that for me is a really key element of any innovation.
Yeah, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But it seems that you're telling us now that innovation isn't automatically progress or change. Intention and impact matter.
The word innovation is judgmental.
Is it?
I think it is. One uses that word. I think there's an implication that it's not just change, but better change.
But better change, yes.
I wouldn't describe the changes to surgical training in the early 2000s as innovative. I think they were. I mean, I can see why you might see them as being innovative, but I think what they've done didn't introduce a better system. It was quicker. It left people with less uncertainty. They knew earlier on in their career whether they'd succeeded or failed to get onto the training program of the requirement. They became a consultant sooner, but in many ways, they've had negative unintended consequences. And that I guess, that's the interesting question about change versus true innovation.
Yes. And there is an argument about who would define responsible, because responsible can be very subjective and relative. Some pharma companies might think, oh, it's legal, so it's fair play. We can do whatever we want.
I mean, I don't see that. Maybe I've been lucky, maybe I've been naive, but I've never found myself in all of the companies I've worked in people make mistakes. People are human, right? Sometimes you get things wrong. We have self-regulation in the UK, and the nature of self-regulation means that there's some greyness and some debate over individual tactics at times. But I always take it back to, would I be comfortable sitting having a conversation with my gran about what I'm about to do?
Yes.
Would I be happy that someone writes an article on it and puts it in a newspaper? And if the answer to that is yes, I'll crack on and do it. Yeah. If I think it's the right thing, and I think it's going to make a positive difference to patients, I think I'm comfortable. Of course, it has to fulfill the requirements of the law as well. And sometimes you then say, and is this compliant with our rules and regulations? And you discover that it isn't. And you think, right, okay, what's the problem here? There's a challenge in the system, and I want to fix it because that will be better for patients. And there are rules that constrain me from doing that. Are those the correct rules? You should always look and ask yourself in any system. Quite often, law and regulation is built in the teeth of catastrophe. So yes. You have something goes spectacularly wrong and people go, oh my goodness, how did that happen? And they introduce regulation. And that regulation doesn't solve the problem and creates unintended consequences elsewhere. And a responsible regulator, which the MHRA absolutely is, recognises that and will say, right, okay, this is a new world. Things are different. How do we adapt? How do we fulfil the mission of safe and effective, responsible innovation in a rapidly changing environment?
What kind of actions from pharmaceutical companies that could potentially damage patients' trust, even when the science behind medicines is solid?
I think one of the really key tenets for trust is transparency. I think that's really fundamental. And it's interesting. Last week, I was at a meeting with Ben Goldacre speaking. So Ben Goldacre is an absolutely fascinating doctor. And he wrote a book many, many years ago called Bad Pharma.
Yes, I know that book. I have it. I haven't read it, but I have it.
You must read it.
It's behind you, actually.
Oh, really? It's an old book now, but Bad Pharma. He's written a number of other books. So it's a challenging read for someone in the pharmaceutical industry. But Ben led a campaign, and it was really fascinating because there wasn't a transparency issue. I think history would judge that there wasn't a transparency issue. But I think what there was a complacency issue.
Complacency.
So when you do science, if it doesn't work, you really should write that up and publish it. You should write it up and publish it so that other people don't make your mistakes and don't repeat the science and do harm. That's really critically important. But the reality is that it's quite difficult to publish negative studies. And, you're not going to get a phase 3 trial that's failed, published in the New England Journal of Medicine or the Lancet. These are places where each week they're getting thousands and thousands and thousands of applications for publications, and they're going to publish the trials that are most groundbreaking, most practice changing. And so, through no fault of their own, I think there's a journal called the Journal of Negative Studies.
That could be very useful.
Yeah, but no one reads it.
Because it's negative, yeah.
But it's useful that it's there because, people get the Lancet through the letterbox. I get the British Medical Journal, comes through my letterbox, and I sit and read it. And I read the interesting studies and I read the interesting articles because all the studies are positive, and that's fascinating. No one sits and reads the Journal of Negative Studies cover to cover.
I can imagine that.
But by publishing them, when you do a literature search for all the studies, they come up and they're in the literature. If you're doing a systematic review of studies that have been, it's critically important. But we weren't typically doing it. I think we weren't publishing all of our negative studies, not because we wanted to hide anything. But because, you do a study, it doesn't work, you kill the drug program, the drug doesn't go anywhere. Who needs to know that you had a negative study with that drug? You own the patent for that drug. No one's ever going to do a study with that drug again. So, does it matter? Yeah, it does. It does matter, because as soon as you don't publish these things, people ask the question, why not? And what Ben did was persuade the industry that you had to publish absolutely everything. The only way for the public to trust us was to publish absolutely everything. And today, the pharmaceutical industry is pretty much perfect. We pretty much publish everything.
That's very reassuring.
Which is amazing. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And the same is not true for academia. If you look at university or healthcare funded research, the publication rates for negative studies are near industry. And in some countries, terrible. I mean, really, really poor. So I think that is the long answer to your question. What matters in terms of building trust? I think transparency. I think openness. You were looking at the Epstein files just now. Why is there so much fuss? There's so much fuss because they're not releasing the files. And by not releasing the files, people fill in, there must be something in them that's damaging to someone. As soon as you start keeping secrets from your wife, if she finds out that you've kept a secret,
you're in big trouble.
You're in big trouble. And you're in big trouble not just on that point, but you're in big trouble on everything.
I found that people appreciate full truth and understand them way better than half truth.
Yeah, of course.